Hey guys, how's it going? In front of me today is a small schwack load of commons from the 2013 expansion Gatecrash. Now what is the most expensive common in the 2013 expansion Gatecrash? Well, that would probably be a tie between Foundry Street Denizen and Prophetic Prism. Both of these cards have a value. Despite being quite versatile, popular cards, their value is only 25 cents each, approximately. Why is this? Well, it's just because they're so common. They're just printed at such a frequency, the supply is so high, that they don't tend to be worth much. Commons are obviously the most common rarity in Magic the Gathering. The four rarities are common, uncommon, rare, and mythic rare as of 2008. And so that got me wondering, what are the most expensive commons in the entire game? How expensive can it get for simply a common card? So the criteria I use for this list is the cheapest, near mint condition, English printing in US dollars. So if I didn't add this stipulation of the cheapest printing, pretty much every single card on the list would end up being an alpha or beta card, so that was one of the big reasons that I added it. But let's just get right into it. So at number 10 is Chromatic Star. Chromatic Star was originally printed in the Time Spiral expansion. It's a 1-mana artifact that you can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and when it's put into a graveyard from play, draw a card. So this one's a little bit unsuspecting to be on this list, but it's essentially just a very versatile card that allows you to color fix and also replaces itself. It cantrips when it dies. It's $6, which is approximately the cost of 40 regular commons. So what makes this card so much more expensive than a regular common from a regular recent set? Well, part of the reason is it's only been printed in the 2006 expansion Time Spiral, and then when it was reprinted in 10th edition, it was upgraded to an uncommon, because I guess Wizards of the Coast deemed it too powerful to be a common anymore. It's essentially an upgraded version of Chromatic Sphere, not strictly better per se, but is upgraded. Chromatic Sphere was a similar card, 1 colorless mana artifact. You can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and draw a card, but the draw a card effect is part of the ability, which means that if you sacrifice Chromatic Star to some different effect, you still get to draw the card, whereas with this, you wouldn't get to draw the card. So the deck is frequently seen as a 4-of in Urzatron decks, which essentially are decks that utilize the Urza cycle lands, Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, and Urza's Power Plant, which tap for 1 colorless mana alone, but when you have at least 1 of each on the field, then they tap for 3 mana, 2 mana, and 2 mana respectively, so 7 mana if you have just 1 set of 3 on the battlefield. So Chromatic Star plays a very important role in converting some of that colorless mana into fresh colored mana for spells like Ancient Stirrings, Crop Rotation, and Sylvan Scrying, which are very important for the deck to function in order to find these lands and make sure that you have the full set of 3 on the battlefield at all times. Chromatic Star is also used a lot in Pauper Affinity, which Pauper is a format where only commons can be used, which is why it's actually an advantage that Chromatic Star was printed at common. The deck is, how should I say, made better by the amount of artifacts that are on the battlefield, so the fact that Chromatic Star is an artifact is an advantage. It has to run the artifact lands, which are not dual lands, and so color fixing can be kind of difficult, which Chromatic Star helps with. And of course, if you have to sacrifice it to an Atog, which is a creature that gets +2/+2 for each artifact you sacrifice, then you still get that draw trigger, unlike with Chromatic Sphere, which is quite nice. It's a nice synergy there. And at number 9 on the list is Lotus Petal. So this card has an obvious reference to Black Lotus. Once you see the effect, it's a 0 mana artifact which can tap and sacrifice for 1 mana of any color. This is essentially 1/3 of a Black Lotus. That's one way to think of it, hence why it's just a petal of the Black Lotus. Black Lotus can tap and sacrifice for 3 mana of any one color, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with, whereas this is 1 mana of any one color, yet still, it's still managed to be restricted alongside Black Lotus in Vintage. Due to its sheer power level, the ability to give you that fast mana is just very, very, very strong in the right decks. It has been reprinted, but only in a few special sets, like From the Vault Exiled and Kaladesh Inventions, so it remains relatively low supply, given that the 1997 expansion Tempest was the only common reprint so far, or I shouldn't say reprint, original printing, and this is why a single copy of this card at its cheapest printing will still cost you $7.50. What would that? That'd be like 50 regular commons. At number 8 is a really unique and interesting card, Darkness. Now, Darkness is 1 black mana, is an instant, and it makes it so that creatures don't deal any combat damage during the turn, which is essentially the exact same as Green's version, which is a lot more popular and famous, Fog. And these days, this is generally a green effect that you don't tend to see very much, in other colors other than green, so having a black version of the effect is really cool and unique and probably used in a lot of casual decks. It's only been printed in Legends and Time Shifted, and despite having a reprint other than Legends, still manages to remain quite a decently expensive common at $8. At number 7 is Fire Ambush. Fire Ambush was printed in Portal 3 Kingdoms, which is pretty much the only reason why this is an expensive common. Portal 3 Kingdoms had an extremely low English print run when it was released because it was a starter set intended mainly for, I believe, a Southeast Asian audience, mainly a Chinese audience. Because the card effect is not really that good. It's 1 colorless, 1 red, sorcery to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. There's just a whole plethora of better effects. I mean, Lightning Bolt is just obviously leagues better, but even something like Searing Spear, which is, it's okay, is considerably better because Searing Spear is an instant. So, nonetheless, this card is worth its weight and worth its money for its collectability value, more so than its effect, and it is a very cool and flavorful set, very old, very low print run, as I said, which is why this common costs $9, and it hasn't been reprinted in any other set, I don't believe. So that's like the cost of 45 eggs if you live in the US, according to this random research that I did on the retail price of eggs in the United States. So there's a price comparison for you. Army of Allah is number 6 on the list. 1 colorless, 2 white. It's an instant. All attacking creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn. Not a very overwhelming effect. You know, it's definitely not a powerful card by any means, but I think part of the reason that it's so expensive is just because of just the fact that you would never see a card like this printed nowadays that's referencing Allah as kind of, you know, religiously charged, I guess you could say, or has a religious reference like this. I just couldn't see Wizards of the Coast making something like this nowadays. The only reason that it was printed was because it was in the first ever expansion set of Magic the Gathering after Alpha Beta Unlimited was Arabian Nights. So I guess you could kind of say it's one of the only reserve list commons. The reserve list is a list of cards that Wizards of the Coast promises never to reprint, but they're all rares. And the reason that I call this somewhat equivalent to a reserve list common is that I really can't see this ever being reprinted. Now that Wizards of the Coast is a big company owned by Hasbro, I really think the chances of it being reprinted are extremely low, if not 0. So it's a pretty safe bet to say that this card is going to be a good collector's item to have and is not going to be reprinted. And I mean, it was its collectible value anyway that made it worth stuff, so even if it was reprinted, it probably wouldn't go down too much. And it costs $11, or around 55 eggs in value. At number 5 is Stone Throwing Devils. So 1 black mana, a creature type devils with first strike, and actually another card with a religious reference. The flavor text in this case reads, "Sometimes those with the most sin cast the first stones." So I mean, this card could see a reprint, but it probably wouldn't have the flavor text reprinted, which I'm assuming this card is mostly worth its money because of its collectible value. I don't see it as being a hugely playable card. I mean, it's better than a Muckrats, but that's not saying much. I personally would much rather have, if I wanted to have a 1/1 for 1 black mana with a keyword ability, a Ruthless Ripper, which has Death Touch instead of First Strike, and Morph, and some other abilities as well. Just a lot more of a versatile, useful card in my opinion. And if I just wanted to beat stick for 1 black mana, I think Carnophage would be a much better option. 2/2 for 1 that has an upkeep cost of 1 life. But nonetheless, it's a really cool card, and it's very flavorful too. I mean, you can imagine some devils throwing rocks at the creature that's attacking it, and those rocks hitting that creature before the creature gets to hit it, hence why it has first strike. So very cool flavor in that sense, and that is why this common card costs $12. At number 4, we're back to cards that are worth money because they're actually good in the game and actually have powerful effects. Rhystic Study is 2 colorless, 1 blue for an enchantment with the effect that whenever an opponent plays a spell, or I guess it would be casts a spell these days, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 colorless mana. So you get to be that annoying person on the table that every time somebody casts a spell, you get to say, hey, you gonna pay the 1? You gonna pay the 1? Hey, you gonna pay the 1? And oftentimes this card leads you to draw an excessive amount of cards in big multiplayer games, especially Commander games. I think Commander is where this card has most of its value come from, as it is ranked number 35 according to EDHREC.com's list of 100 most popular EDH cards by color identity. It is in 37,506 decks out of 142,064 decks in the site's database, which accounts for 26% of possible decks that it could be in that have blue as part of their color identity, which means that over 1 in 4 decks that could run this card are running it, which is pretty insane if you think about it. And I'm sure a lot of us do have experience with this card and are quite annoyed by it when others play it, and I imagine the only reason it's not included in more decks is because of people who don't want to be so annoying by playing this card, and not because they don't think the effect is powerful enough, because the effect is just ridiculously good in multiplayer. And that's why copies of this card cost around $14, on top of the fact that it has only been printed in the Prophecy expansion of 2000, I believe, as in the year 2000, and has only been reprinted in, what was it called, that Commander's Arsenal all-foil set, which is a very low print run set, so it didn't affect the supply very much. And as you can see here, the price has been increasing relatively stable. It's not a common which has absolutely spiked like a lot of other commons. It doesn't, or I shouldn't say a lot of other commons, like a lot of other cards have. You know, it hasn't been bought out, I don't believe. It seems like a relatively natural price growth, which is another interesting thing about Rhystic Study. At number 3 is Manamorphose. So for 1 colorless and 1 hybrid green or red mana, you can have an instant that adds 2 mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool, and you draw a card. So this is a really interesting effect, the ability to kind of completely replace itself in the sense of mana color fix. It's been printed as common in Shadowmoor and uncommon in the original Modern Masters set, so it has been reprinted, surprisingly, considering its price. Excuse me, this card saw a mild increase in playability and performance, I guess, since the 2010 rules update. After the card was printed, there was a rules change which made it so that mana burn didn't exist anymore. And for those unfamiliar, mana burn was basically a rule that made you get dealt damage based on the amount of mana that you had floating in your mana pool. So if you played Manamorphose, you added the 2 mana to your mana pool just so that you could draw a card and you had nothing else to cast, and then that card ends up being a land or something like that. While mana burn existed, you would have had to take 2 damage by not being able to use that mana to cast something, which is now gone, which makes the card slightly better. And just in general, it's one rare effect. I don't really know of any other effects that can completely replace themselves as efficiently as Manamorphose does in terms of something that also color fixes your mana. Chromatic Star, Terrarian, Chromatic Star being the other card that we talked about earlier on this list. All these types of effects require you pay more mana than they actually give. So Chromatic Star is 1 mana, and then you have to pay another 1 to get the 1 mana. So it's 2 mana for 1 mana to mana fix and draw a card. And Terrarian similarly is a total of 3 mana for 2 mana to color fix, whereas Manamorphose is 2 mana for 2 mana to color fix. So it does not have this mana loss issue. It's completely mana neutral, I guess you could say. And in fact, it can even be mana gaining if you use it with effects like Goblin Electromancer and Barrel Chief of Compliance that reduce the cost of your instants and sorcery spells by 1 colorless mana. Because then you're casting it for 1 and you're getting 2 mana. So it's actually ramping your mana. It's actually a ritual effect and it draws you a card, which is really, really sweet and is actually used a lot in modern Storm decks, I believe. So Storm decks are basically types of decks that try to cast as many spells as they can in a single turn in order to unleash a giant Storm spell. Storm is a mechanic which, when you play a spell, you copy it for each spell played before it during the turn. So Grape Shot, for example, deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and let's say you've cast a crazy amount of spells during the turn, like 30 spells, then you'd copy it 30 times, and you could deal 30 damage to your opponent. So that's how Storm would work. And so the card is really effective in these decks. It allows you to just like cast more spells during a single turn, to filter through your deck, find more cards, and it's really effective if you can cast it again from your graveyard with effects like Past in Flames and Yawgmoth's Will. So even if you aren't able to cast it for a reduced mana cost, you're still casting 2 spells from it, and you're getting to draw 2 cards for essentially free, which can be very effective. And of course, if you have Goblin Electromancer or Barrel in play, then you get extra mana as well, and color fixing, which I believe is also important in Storm because a lot of the ritual effects only add red mana, so oftentimes it can be great to convert that red mana into blue mana for casting the spells that have a blue casting cost in Blue-Red Storm. Another combo that I read about that I thought was worth mentioning, because a lot of people seem to talk about it online, was Izzet Guildmage and Training Grounds to essentially let you draw your entire deck and gain an insane amount of mana. So the way that the combo works is you have this card called Izzet Guildmage, a 2/2 human wizard with an ability that you can pay 2 colorless, 1 blue to copy an instant you control with converted mana cost 2 or less, and you may choose new targets for it. Training Grounds reduces the costs of activated abilities of creatures you control by up to 2 colorless mana. So I know it's a little bit confusing, but basically what you can do with this combo is cast Manamorphose for 2 mana, use the Izzet Guildmage's ability for the reduced cost of 1 blue mana to copy Manamorphose. So you paid 3 mana, you got Manamorphose on the stack, you got your copy on the stack, your copy resolves, you add 2 blue mana to your mana pool, you draw a card, and then using that 2 blue mana, you can copy it again. You still have 1 left extra, you draw an extra card. When it resolves, then you have 3 mana, do it again, 4 mana, etc. Keep drawing cards every time. Draw your entire deck, and then unleash a giant Banefire, or take your pick from whatever spell you prefer that can convert mana into damage to instantly destroy your opponent, or any Storm spell, because I suppose if you had that much mana and that many spells in your hand, it wouldn't be hard at all to get a massive Storm count and destroy your opponent that way. So that was a cool little combo that I thought was worth mentioning for a really, really powerful card like Manamorphose. And it costs around $15 at the time that I made this video, and it's actually a little bit more. It's probably a little bit closer to 17 or 18 bucks, but I believe it has been bought out in the last few weeks. As you can see on this price chart here, I don't know if that's visible on the camera there, that it suddenly spiked, and as little as a month ago it was $10, and it's basically sold out everywhere online. So I feel like it's probably going to stabilize and go back down a little bit in the near future, so I thought $15 was a little bit more accurate of a price to put, so that's why I put that. And I do wonder if this was because Manamorphose was leaked to not have been reprinted in Ultimate Masters. Maybe that's why it got bought out. Maybe you guys have some insights on that for me in the comments. At number 2 is Oubliette. This is a very fascinating card, and many people are familiar with this actually because it's such an expensive common. It's kind of famous for that reason. But I just want to read to you guys the wording, because I thought the wording on this card is just really funny because it's such an old card. Originally printed in Arabian Nights, and actually that's the only printing that this card has. It reads, select a creature in play when Oubliette is cast. Actually, technically it's when it comes into play, but this old wording says cast. That creature is considered out of play as long as Oubliette is in play. Hence the creature cannot be the target of spells and cannot receive damage, use special powers, attack, or defend. What is it? Oh, sorry. All counters and enchantments on the creature remain, but are also out of play. If Oubliette is removed, the creature returns into play tapped. So, yeah, just like, I don't know, using the word hence and just all this like special powers, I just think it's so funny. And for those of you that don't know, an oubliette is a secret dungeon with an opening only in the ceiling, as in certain old castles, according to dictionary.com. And just to read the oracle text quickly, because that oracle text was a little bit confusing maybe for people that are used to the regular Magic wording. When oubliette enters the battlefield, exile target creature and all auras attached to it. Note the number and kind of counters that were on that creature. When oubliette leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control tapped with the noted number and kind of counters on it. If you do, return the other exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control attached to that permanent. So this is my little example here. You can see this creature has some dice counters, has some counters on it. Doesn't matter how many, and a couple enchantment auras on it. So if somebody cast oubliette and it resolved, enters the battlefield, it would exile this card, the enchantments counters would go with it, and then if it ever left play, it would come back tapped with everything on it still, which is very unique, very interesting. They don't tend to print effects like this very often. It's basically like an Oblivion Ring, or a little bit more accurately, Journey to Nowhere. I just say Oblivion Ring because more people are familiar with that card. You know, it exiles a creature for as long as it's in play, which oftentimes tends to be the whole game, so it's used as kind of like a black Oblivion Ring, black removal spell. And it should be noted too that the effect of the enchantment, auras, and counters coming back when it's destroyed is not completely a negative. If you're playing an infect deck, for example, you're going to want those -1 counters to stay on your opponent's creatures, even if they kill your oubliette. And is also surprisingly effective, and this is something I didn't realize until I started researching for this video. It's very, very effective against Rancor, which is a very powerful common used, I believe, a lot in Pauper. And this card completely nerfs Rancor because the main sort of reason that Rancor is so powerful is that when it goes to the graveyard, it goes back to your hand. It's a 1 green mana enchantment that gives a creature +2/+0 and trample. But when you cast oubliette, normally the drawback of having the enchantment go out of play and then come back is actually a huge advantage here, because then Rancor is also exiled and the opponents can't get it back to their hand and replay it, which is a very interesting interaction. And costs $40. $40 for a common, you guys. Why? Why does it cost $40? Well, basically, all that I could come up with was that it's unlike a lot of regular black removal spells, and especially the ones that common have restrictions and things that they can't hit. For example, Doomblade destroys non-black creatures. You know, you have other spells that give creatures -X/-X until end of turn, which won't kill creatures with high toughness. Whereas oubliette simply exiles any creature, and it also gets past regeneration, indestructible, etc. And exile is pretty rare as a black effect, and especially at common, it's not something that you see very often. So it's useful and versatile for that reason. And I think, too, another big reason is that it stays on the battlefield and counts as devotion for Grey Merchant of Asphodel for Pauper mono-black control decks. Grey Merchant is often a finisher in these decks, which, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So essentially you're gaining 2 extra devotion, 2 extra black mana symbols on your permanents, which is just good synergy with that card, good synergy in that deck. But I mean, even still, it's only a 1 or 2 of, according to the lists that I was looking at, and I think even in some lists don't even run it. So the fact that it's $40 is quite surprising. You know, even that it's a Arabian Nights card, it still surprised me that this costs $40. So, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, maybe those are enough to, with the low supply, make it worth a ton of money, with Pauper growing in popularity and everything. But, I mean, the card's held value decently well since 2018, has been worth around $50 or $40, and is not crashing down or anything anytime soon. So it doesn't seem to be based on the chart anyway. So, yeah, very interesting. Some people have speculated that they won't reprint oubliette because it has so much text and it's such a weird kind of outdated effect that they wouldn't really print on cards anymore. But then others have noted that cards like Animated Dead have a ton of text and a really complicated effect, and yet have been reprinted. So it's really uncertain still whether oubliette will ever be reprinted or not. And the moment you've all been waiting for. At number 1, we have 3 Visits. So another Portal 3 Kingdoms card. As I mentioned earlier, Portal 3 Kingdoms had an extremely small English print run. Not to mention just a relatively low print run in general. It was mostly released in... yeah, I already talked about that. Mostly released in Asia, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the effect is 1 colorless, 1 green. Sorcery, search your library for a forest, put it into play, shuffle your library. Very, very simple effect. So, how much do you guess this card will cost? Well, before I tell you that, I'll tell you a few things about the card. It's included in 1,587 decks, according to edhrec.com. The reason that I cited this was because, at least I'm assuming, this is most of the reason where this card's value comes from is EDH. Maybe Pauper, but if you're playing Pauper, I would think you'd go with 4 copies of Nature's Lore first, which is literally the exact same card. It has the exact same effect with a different name, except it costs $2 instead of the ridiculously high price of 3 visits. Should be noted also that the effect to find a forest rather than a basic land, like a lot of other green cards effects, such as Rampant Growth, for example, finding a forest can actually be a very big advantage rather than a disadvantage. It seems like a disadvantage at first because you think, oh, you can only find green mana instead of any color of mana, but you can find non-basic lands with it, which is really great. So, cards like Sapseed Forest, Dryad Arbor, which is also a creature, could be very useful to find. Breeding Pool and Taiga, so these are just 2 examples of dual lands that have both the forest and a different land type, so the original dual land cycle and the Ravnica Shock land cycle. And a couple other land cycles as well do have both of those land types. So not only can you find a dual land with your ramp spell for only 2 mana, but you can also have it not come into play tapped if you pay 2 life with a shock land, or if you have an original dual land in your deck, which is super, super good. It's super effective. Should be noted too that Rampant Growth is an exceptionally popular card in Commander, and is also on the top 100 list, just like Rhystic Study. It is in 25,971 decks, which is 20% of the 132,066 decks that could possibly run it that have green in their color identity. So Rampant Growth, such a popular card, and 3 visits and Nature's Lore, a card that is, in my opinion, better if the deck is built around it. You can see why this card, Rampant Growth is ranked number 62, but you can see why 3 visits is a card that is actually quite sought after, especially in Commander where you can only have 1 copy of each card. If you're running Nature's Lore, I mean, chances are you also want to run 3 visits, right? But probably the biggest thing holding people back is just the financial cost, which is, drumroll please, the moment you've all been waiting for, $80. Holy shitsicles. That's ridiculous. For a common. $80 for a common. I couldn't believe that when I saw this. I had no idea there was any common in the game worth $80. I always thought Oubliette was the most expensive common because of Pauper and because of, well, whatever other reasons that it spiked recently, but $80 for 3 visits. That's the equivalent of 400 eggs. You could make 3 visits to different neighborhoods and egg people's houses and still have plenty of eggs to spare if you live in the United States for the same cost as a piece of cardboard. Just a little caution before I end the video. All the cards are, maybe subject to dramatic price drops if they're reprinted in the future. Obviously, commons are the most susceptible. I mean, Magic the Gathering cards are dangerously risky to begin with, especially because of the chance of reprints, but commons especially so because they'll be reprinted in such high volumes if they are reprinted. And of course, cards like 3 Visits, Oubliette, they're very, their value comes in part by their rareness and collectability, so I think they wouldn't be completely worthless. I mean, of course they wouldn't be completely worthless if they were reprinted, but I do think they would at least risk dropping significantly in price if people had a cheaper alternative to have, so just something to note. And before I wrap up the video, I wanted to just mention a couple of honorable mentions, cards that didn't make it on the list, because there would have been too many cards, I felt, from Portal 3 Kingdoms otherwise, and I wanted the list to be a little bit more diverse. But I just thought that I should mention these cards too because they are quite expensive for commons as well. Forest Bear, also known as the Go Long Bear, is essentially just the grizzly bears with a different name. It's the exact same effect. 2 mana for a 2/2 bears creature, same as Rune Claw Bear. So I mean, nothing super special to see here. But Grizzly Bears, pretty iconic card. Actually, Gathering Magic made a pretty interesting video on it. called The History of Grizzly Bears, which is pretty cool. Recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it. And yeah, so I just wanted to mention that quickly, and costs around $6 or $7. Same with Zodiac Rat was another example. Just another Portal 3 Kingdoms card. Very simple effect, 1 black mana for a 1/1 with Swamp Walk, Rat. Nifty little card, but once again, just didn't want to have 40% of the cards be Portal 3 Kingdoms. So yeah, that about wraps it up. Do you guys have any speculations? Definitely let me know in the comments if you think there's any cards, any commons that are not on this list that are maybe undiscovered, maybe they have a low supply and you think that they're going to end up on this list, that you think they're undervalued, they're going to be worth a lot in the future. Are there any cards on this list that you think are not worth their money? You think are going to be reprinted maybe? You think they're going to lose a lot of value? Definitely let me know in the comments, and let me know too if there's any things that I didn't mention, any reasons or interesting facts about the cards that make them unique and powerful and worth money that I didn't mention in the video. Love to hear your opinions. And that about wraps it up for this video. Yeah, subscribe if you want to see more videos, and I will see you in the next one.